That song, many of you know it. It's a tune by the progressive rock band, a Canadian band called Rush. And most of you already know that I am and have always been a big fan of theirs. And I played that because I wanted to talk just a little bit about the whole idea of practicing. You've got a PDF, of course, that I want you to read through. Excuse me. But I thought I would just talk a little bit about my views on practicing and how it might influence your practicing habits. So I think generally in the world of music, it's a bit of a nasty word, it's a bit of a swear word, because for many I think it conjures up notions of ridiculous amounts of repetition and then probably boredom and just plain old not fun. It's not, it's not doing the stuff you hoped you'd be doing. So there's an inherent problem with practice, and that is practicing how to practice, which is the title for the PDF. Developing basically some habits about how you approach practice is generally something that just isn't talked about very much. So I thought we should do that and highlight some of those, and then hopefully get you somewhat motivated to want to dig into practice and start to see it from a different point of view. It is a means to an end. The end is what? The end is I want to play the instrument. Now it could mean I want to be a competent improviser. I want to play songs that, other people's music, which is always satisfying when you do it well, especially if you're ridiculously attracted to it, as I was to Rush. Still am to a certain degree, although my musical tastes have expanded in my aging years. So I think the main thing that any student needs to be able to do is develop a habit of practice to the point that the act of practicing is not perceived as something that gets done basically when everything else is done. The whole notion of I'll do it when I have some free time, which is pretty common for a recreational player. I get that, I understand it. But as any skill, if you do that when you do have the free time after the rest of your busy day is complete, you'll be too tired. Your brain won't want to do it. So one of the biggest challenges for me as a teacher is to help encourage students to carve out time, to make it a priority to some extent. In your list of things that need to get done during the day, where does guitar fit into that? If it's at the bottom of the list and it's the thing you do when everything else is done, 9 times out of 10, if not more, that's an email coming through, just ignore that. 9 times out of 10, it's not going to get done, simply because you're too tired. You need a bit of a sharp mind in order to practice well. So that would be probably the #1 habit, if you will, that I would encourage you to do. You've got to give it enough priority that you say, at this time of day, generally, the same time of day, I will commit whatever, 20 minutes, half an hour of time to my instrument. And it's important enough to you to do that, that basically you sort of shut the world off for that period of time. You're not on the computer, you're not on the phone. You just heard my email, of course, but I'm not practicing. You're not on the phone. Hopefully, if you have family around you, they understand that that time is for you to practice and they won't disturb you. I often say to my kids, don't knock on my door when I'm practicing unless you're on fire. It's kind of cruel, but it kind of makes the point that that's how important it is to me. I'm still practicing. I teach, but I still practice. It's a lifestyle for me at this point in the game. For my students, it's a recreational hobby, part of a bigger life. I get that. But you still need to find time and carve it out consistently so a habit starts to develop. So that's one point. The other point is to kind of reinvent what your perception of practice is. I touch on this in the PDF, but good to reiterate it here. Practicing is not just working on a song, let's say, and then starting to rehearse it. Start at the beginning and try to play through. It really isn't that. When you're doing that, you are rehearsing. If you can play the whole song through, you're rehearsing it. You're not practicing it. Practicing it means there are spots in it, in everything you're working on. There are spots in it that require more attention. There's a difficult chord change, or there's a weird finger transition that has to take place, or there's a rhythm issue. There's something just about in every song that can throw a student off from being able to play that tune wonderfully. Our job is to isolate that little bit and work on it. So really practicing is about solving a problem or solving a challenge or taking on that particular challenge. So the key feature is, and I've spoken to many of you about this, when you identify that bit, you have to pull it out. You have to, what I call, chunk it, chunkify it. Pull it out of the song and treat that little portion that's giving you trouble as a little exercise in itself, so that all your energy, all your focus is on that, nothing else. And you've given your brain and your mind the space to really focus on that portion alone, which is going to speed up the learning of it. That's the idea. So in practical terms, it could be, and I've experienced this many times myself, if I've pulled out a part that's difficult and I'm working on it, I'm not at all surprised at this stage of the game that I would need to work that, play it through, study it, in a sense, 10 or 20 times more often going through it than I would actually play the song that it belongs to. Which speaks to another idea that I have, that when I talk to students about the repeating of things, my idea of repetition is very different from theirs. I'm extremely comfortable at this stage accepting that if I have to repeat something in order to get good at it, in my world, first of all, anything worked on less than 30 days, a good month of working at it, you have no reason to come back and complain that you can't get it. You really do have to give yourself a realistic amount of time to get comfortable with a new skill or a new task. So I give myself that. Even if it's a relatively simple task, I'll give myself a full month to say, okay, I am fully comfortable with what's required of it, what it's asking of me physically to play. 30 days is a good benchmark for that skill development area. The other area is that I have to get comfortable with the fact that repetition is going to mean lots. It doesn't mean 2 or 3 times a week. I guess I said that a little offhandishly. It certainly doesn't mean, repetition does not refer to, oh, I practiced it 2 or 3 times this week. Repetition is about how many times you do have to go through it before you get a deep sense that, hey, I'm beginning to sense that it's improving. It's not about the number of times that you practice. It's about paying attention to whether you feel or perceive any improvement in what you're doing. That might take 3 repetitions, or it may take 1,000. I mean, it really doesn't matter. So I guess the point with regards to repetition is you have to come to enjoy it to a certain extent. There's a certain, for me, there's a certain meditative nature about it where I get to shut myself off from the world for a while and sit with the instrument and really get to study what I'm doing. How well the fingers are working, how good is my rhythm, am I as accurate as I can be, am I cleaning up my sounds that might be buzzing out on me? Can I play it up to speed, or do I have to stay at a slower tempo for a while until I'm comfortable with it? All of that is encompassed in repetition. And yet, I get it. The word itself, it encompasses or gives people images of drudgery and, you know, just drudgery, boredom, and ugh. To which I've often said to many students, you know what, there's nothing inherently boring about what you're working on. But the key is to, as you're practicing, as you're repeating, to really pay attention and observe, are there any additional benefits from today's practice that make me better than what I did yesterday through all the repetitions that I did? If you pay attention to that in the act of playing and repeating pieces or sections of pieces, you're going to stay much more motivated because you're looking for something. You're not just repeating mindlessly. You're looking. You're trying to discover, does the feel of a new chord change feel remarkably smooth now and easy to the point that I don't even understand why I had a problem with it? That's good. How many times did it take you to do that? Who cares? It doesn't matter. What matters is you stuck it out and you were looking for that goal. You were looking for that solution. I want it to feel effortless. Everyone's different with regards to how fast that happens. We don't deeply know, all the people that we know who play, we don't deeply know how much they practice unless we're, you know, practicing with them. So somebody who might accomplish the same task earlier than you have no clue. Maybe they put in 10 hours a day and you put in 20 minutes a day. We don't know. It doesn't matter. What matters is your own journey, your own learning pace, your own style of learning. So you got to get comfortable with repetition, and you've got to see it as a bit more of a feel. Am I feeling that I'm getting better? Not just putting in a day's worth of practice and repetition for the sake of getting that done. That's not good. That'll never get you anywhere. So there is a bit of a goal at the end of repetition. And as this circle of repetition continues to go around, you realize that that's really the only way to get good at anything. Train as a doctor, you're going to be repeating a lot of skills. Train as a plumber, train as a musician, train as a bus driver. I mean, you name it. Train as a carpenter. Everybody's involved in repetition. So there's nothing unique with regards to the instrument in that sense. Okay, so we've got repetition, we've got carving out time to take up the instrument. Let's look at this piece that I played for you, because I always found this story to be compelling to me anyway. The brief story is, after about 5 years of taking guitar lessons formally, I did attend my first rock concert. It happened to be a Rush concert back in 1976, 77, somewhere in there. I had no clue what to expect. I knew nothing of the band. Quite frankly, I don't even know who I went with, but I know I went with someone because I wouldn't have gone on my own. And I know it would have been a good friend, but you know, it was so long ago now, I can't even remember. I was so taken by the concert that the morning after, I rushed out to Sam the Record Man, which is no longer with us, which I think is a bad mistake. And I went and bought the album, and the album was Farewell to Kings. And I put that album on my turntable. There are a few left on the planet. And I listened to that. And the music just, I cannot explain it, it just took me away. It was a sound that was so attractive to my ears that I had to play the stuff. I just had to. I was already becoming a guitar player. I already had some skill sets that had grown over the previous 5 years of lessons. I guess I felt I was ready to take on the next challenge, which was to learn that music by ear. That's a big challenge back then. No internet, no tablature, no standard notation written out for any of these bands. It was just a record and you. And that was it. By the way, also the morning after, I called up my guitar teacher and said, that's it, I'm finished, I'm done my lessons. I did ultimately go back and take a few more years with him, but basically I took about 3 years off from taking formal lessons. And my goal was very simple. I just needed to play this music. I was so focused on it. Myopically, I must say, in hindsight, it was this. If you couldn't play Rush as a guitarist, you couldn't play. That was the feeling among the crowd that I was hanging out in. It's not correct, but it was correct for me at the time. So I was very proud to be a part of that, even though I was not influenced by other players. I just wanted to learn that music. And anything other than Rush was just easy caveman rock music, nothing to it. So there's the challenge. And so you want to talk about practice. Well, here's where practice really kicked in. You're listening to a particular piece. The one I played for you is Closer to the Heart. Just that little section right there. My memory's vague, but I can honestly say that that part of the tune itself probably took me about 3 months to get. Now put that in perspective today. Today kids, if they want to learn a song, what's the first thing they do? They go to the internet and they look up somebody's tablature for it, which has been put up by somebody who's not a professional transcriber of music, and they have this silly little caution sign most of the time saying something like, well, I think this is how the song goes, you give it a try and see how you do. That's not very comforting, in my opinion. Your ear is your best bet. So here I am listening to the tune, and I'm saying to myself, just that. Can I find that thing anywhere here? Hey, can I find this? The first two. Can I find the first note? Forget this. I'm looking for that. I hear it on the record, I got to find it on the guitar. At the time, it was a lot of hunting around, trial and error. But I knew this at least. Am I hearing a low sound? Am I hearing a high sound? High sound. So there was no sense in looking at the lower strings and trying to hunt around. Your intuition says I'm looking for there. So it probably took me about 20 minutes just to find that note. And then I'd cue up the record again, and every time the song would start, I'd try to hit that note exactly with the beginning of that little phrase. And if it was right, oh, I was jumping up and down. I couldn't believe I did that. If I could find the first note, I can find the second note. If I can find those two, I can find the third note. And I can find them all because I have a sense that, they're all in and around where my hand is. I mean, that's how a human plays. So there's a certain common sense that went in, but the time was about finding the note and then doing it over again, and doing it over again, and doing it over again. And after about 3 months, my recollection, you could go... But I ran into a snag. I knew this part, and I knew this bit, and I knew this bit. I could find those things, but there's one bit in between them that's this. So it's this context, just so you know. That one. So of those three, 1, 2, 3, the first and the third I figured out. But the middle one I couldn't. For the life of me I could not figure it out. I had no clue. I just happened to be in the music room at high school, and I was noodling on the tune, and someone heard me, and he walked over, and turns out he likes Rush as well, and he said he happened to know that particular portion, and he showed it to me. And I can still feel it right now. When the first moment that he had me finger this thing, and then that was the magic sound that I was hunting for. I couldn't get it for the life of me, and finally there it was, right? And it was so simple. I mean, in hindsight, it was ridiculously simple. My point is, after all of that activity, when I got home that day after finding how that middle chord worked out, my practice kicked in. You know, school was out around 3:30ish. I get home. I don't have a part-time job yet. I'm at home. I think, other than eating supper, I was on the guitar playing that tune, start to finish, that opening riff, from, I think, about 6 o'clock until easily 5:30 the next morning. What was I doing that whole time? Still gives me shivers. To be able to do that some 40 years later, here's the point. When I did the repetition of that, the practice of that, over that, you know, almost a 12-hour period, on that fateful day and night, it went like that. And the reason it went like that, I had no qualms at all about repeating this over and over and over. For one reason, I desperately wanted to be able to play it. So there was a passion there that's difficult to communicate and get. But if you've got it, that's going to help you get there. Number two, technically to be able to play it, I was willing to put in the time and make sure I could do it smoothly and up to speed. I played it along with the album all the time. But the repetition of it became joyful, because with each newfound note and new chord, I was getting sort of reinvigorated. So after that one day, I'd go and start playing it for my friends and show it off, and show it off, until eventually it just became easy as pie to do. All in all, it probably took, not playing it well here, probably took close to 5 months, maybe even 6, for me to be able to do that. Now, if somebody came into the studio, and that's a lot of practice, let me tell you. I mean, but it was driven by passion. I'm not earning a living teaching guitar at this stage of the game. I'm just so enamored by that music. You need to find a music that does the same for you. That will help tremendously in your practice. Find a sound that works for you. You're going to want to play it. So when I say to students today, yeah, you know, it probably took 5, 6 months to pull that off, their jaws drop because their sense of time and repetition and practice is so much smaller. I'm not saying it's wrong, but it does seem to have a bad spin-off, and that is, how willing are you to put the time in to get it right? It doesn't matter how much time it is, but you've got to seriously ask yourself, are you willing to put the time in? You know, it's kind of a delayed gratification thing. Once you've gone through that cycle of putting the time in and getting the success out of that, once you see that cycle go through, it's just going to happen time and time and time again. That's the way it works. Maybe it happens quicker because of your past experience, but the really sad thing is when you don't give yourself the opportunity to come full circle before you go on to another tune that you want to work on because you're bored with this one, that's when you're doing yourself a disfavor, a disservice, I should say. You definitely want to train yourself, if you're going to start it, to finish it. That's kind of the point of my banter for the last 10 minutes. If you're going to start it, make a commitment to finishing it. It doesn't have to be the whole song. It just has to be that portion And as you get that portion really well done, that skill translates into everything else you do from that point forward. Don't skip out of it prematurely, either because of some frustration you're having with it, or you claim you're being bored with it, or you've played it too much. All of that stuff, when it starts to creep in, that's a sign that says you're at the edge of breaking through. You're almost there, and you're deciding to stop and go on and do something else. I guarantee you, the fact that you didn't finish the first task, whatever skill set is not added to that, is just going to show up in something else down the road. So you're going to address the same issue again. You're better off making the commitment to finish it through. So big picture, in terms of practice, you need to make sure you have good practice time. It has to be consistent and not so long that it puts your mind to sleep. You're going to have to decide that length for yourself. And you've got to do it often enough that it becomes a habit. What's the other issue for practice? You've got to get friendly with repetition. There's just no way around it. If you have no patience for repetition, it probably means you have no patience for repetition in any aspect of your life. It needs to happen. So there's two. And then the third for me is that you have to come to some aspect of music with a passion. You've got to want to get it. If that doesn't mean anything to you, then you're sort of just going through the motions. And it doesn't matter who you're listening to. In my case, it was Rush. In somebody else's case, it could be Backstreet Boys. In someone else's, it's classical music, it's Mozart, it doesn't matter. You've got to find the music that runs the passion, that makes you want to be able to play it on the instrument. Hopefully you're in a position where you can discover that, and I would encourage that in the long run to help your guitar playing. So those are the big three issues I wanted to talk about. It took a little longer than I expected. So again, go and breeze through the PDF, get a sense of that article on practicing, and I think what we're going to do in session 4 now is pull all what we talked about today, pull all of that together and apply it to some pretty tough spots for a lot of guitarists, which involves chord making and chord changing. That's a big barrier for a lot of people. So this is a great segue for that session coming up. So I hope to see you then, and take care for now. See you guys.